In early August of 1944, Army General Johannes Blaskowitz found himself faced with an almost impossible challenge. He had only 12 hours to orchestrate a strategic retreat, moving a formidable force of 200,000 soldiers through a narrow, treacherous mountain pass. The situation was dire, as enemy forces, particularly American paratroopers, had already begun executing behind-the-lines operations, spreading chaos and complicating his movements. Meanwhile, a colossal naval fleet was rapidly approaching the French Riviera, armed with enough firepower to reduce any conventional resistance to rubble. To make matters worse, his one mobile reserve, the 11th Panzer Division, was running dangerously low on fuel, its vehicles barely able to keep the route to Germany operational as it fought to delay the advancing Allied forces. Back in August of 1944, on the southern coast of France, a second landing on the beaches, often referred to as a second D-Day, had shattered the peace and pressed heavily on German command. It was during this turbulent time that Blaskowitz received an order from Hitler, a directive so extraordinary and unprecedented that his staff officers had to read it twice to ensure they understood correctly. They were to retreat. Even as he faced this command, Blaskowitz knew with a heavy heart that escape through such a formidable battlefield would require actions nearly unthinkable, challenging the very limits of resistance and maneuvering that had been ingrained in military doctrine. Meanwhile, in the shadowy, strategic chambers of the Allied High Command, a daring and ambitious concept was taking shape from as early as 1942. General George Marshall, who served as the Chief of Staff of the United States Army, was a key proponent of invading southern France, a plan that seemed bold but promising. The idea gained significant momentum during the Tehran Conference in December of the following year. As the Allied leaders gathered around the conference table, they shared a unified focus: how to effectively break Hitler's hold on Western Europe in the year 1944. The meticulously planned invasion of Normandy, known as Operation Overlord, was the central feature of this effort and was widely accepted as the key to establishing a foothold in Western Europe. Yet, a critical question lingered in the minds of strategists. What would be the best second major operation to complement the Normandy landings and maximize the impact on German defenses? The atmosphere was charged with heated debate and diverse opinions about the most effective next step. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill strongly advocated for an expansion of the Allied military efforts into the Mediterranean region, with a particular interest in targeting the Balkans. He believed that striking at this region could cut off vital oil supplies that fueled Germany's war machine, thereby crippling its ability to sustain prolonged fighting. Moreover, Churchill saw an additional benefit. By moving into the Balkans, the Allies could also check the momentum of the Soviet forces advancing across Eastern Europe, thus restraining Stalin's ambitions and influence. In stark contrast, Supreme Allied Commander General Dwight D. Eisenhower, along with President Franklin D. Roosevelt, was firmly in favor of executing a direct assault on southern France, an operation at the time codenamed Anvil. Roosevelt, who was nearing a pivotal presidential election scheduled for 1944, was cautious about spreading his forces too thin, fearing such a diversion might weaken their primary focus on the Normandy campaign and jeopardize their overall success. His concern was that overextending the Allied forces could jeopardize the momentum they had built and risk delaying the inevitable victory. However, the strategic landscape was dramatically altered when Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin publicly supported Roosevelt's plan. Stalin perceived the Operation Anvil as critical to orchestrating a coordinated effort that would squeeze Germany from two fronts, a move designed to hasten the collapse of German resistance. The decision was made at the highest levels, elevating the operation to a level of utmost importance. Military planners issued urgent warnings that no action should be taken that might undermine or jeopardize the success of both the Normandy invasion and the secondary assault across France. They emphasized that the timing and resources had to be carefully managed, warning explicitly that nothing must be undertaken which risks the success of these two operations. Despite this, Winston Churchill voiced strong opposition to the plan for Anvil, warning that past experiences, such as the costly and indecisive stalemate at Anzio, demonstrated the risks involved in such large amphibious assaults. His concerns centered around the high casualties and the uncertain results that such operations could entail. Meanwhile, logistical realities further constrained the possibilities. The massive logistics of the Normandy invasion had consumed nearly all available tank landing ships, which made supporting two simultaneous amphibious landings effectively impossible at that stage of the war. Additionally, mounting political opposition, concerns over supply shortages, and the complex coordination requirements ultimately led to the shelving of the plan for the second landing on the French Atlantic coast. Thus, the grand dream of launching concurrent invasions along both the Normandy coast and southern France was set aside, at least for the moment. However, not everyone abandoned this ambitious idea altogether. One man, General Jacob Devers, persisted in maintaining a vision for the operation, continuing to press for its realization despite the mounting logistical and political obstacles. His unwavering advocacy exemplified the strategic debates and difficult choices that characterized the Allied planning efforts during those tense and pivotal days of the Second World War. Initially entrusted with the critical task of orchestrating the strategic design of the operation, the American military leader General Devers quietly maintained the momentum of preparations behind the scenes. His unwavering persistence and behind-the-scenes efforts proved invaluable as the shifting tides of World War II's relentless conflict began to favor the Allied forces. The summer months of 1944 marked a period of profound transformation on the Western Front, as significant advances of Allied forces opened new avenues while exposing emerging challenges. By this point, Operation Overlord had succeeded in establishing a precarious yet vital foothold in the Normandy region of France, heralding a turning point in the tide of the war. However, the Allied command soon recognized a growing crisis. The crucial supply lines supporting the invasion were becoming increasingly strained. The ports that had been captured in northern France, essential for depleting supplies and reinforcements from Allied ships, were unable to keep pace with the demands of the rapidly expanding front. This bottleneck in logistics presented a severe threat. If unresolved, it risked halting the momentum of the entire Western Allied campaign and could potentially allow German forces to regroup. Amidst this worsening situation, the Allied naval forces finally succeeded in amassing a substantial fleet capable of supporting a second amphibious assault, an effort that could break the deadlock and accelerate the liberation of France. The plan was further reinforced by voices from the French resistance and generals loyal to Charles de Gaulle's Liberation Army, who passionately argued that French forces must be given a pivotal role in liberating their homeland. Their plea reflected the growing recognition that local forces could bolster the Allied campaign, help restore French sovereignty, and boost morale. However, the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill remained firmly opposed to this new venture, dismissing it as a reckless distraction from the main effort. Even as generals such as Eisenhower and Roosevelt pressed ahead with plans for the operation, Churchill criticized the proposal, labeling it an unnecessary risk. Remarkably, less than 2 weeks prior to the anticipated landings, Churchill proposed shifting the focus entirely by suggesting an invasion along the coast of Brittany instead. His strategic aim was to redirect Allied involvement elsewhere, perhaps in hopes of avoiding overextension or securing a different maritime target. Yet, the resolve of the American leadership did not waver. With steadfast support from President Roosevelt, General Eisenhower successfully secured approval for the operation from the combined Allied Chiefs of Staff on the 14th of July, 1944. In a gesture laden with symbolism, the plan's nomenclature was altered as a subtle rebuke of Churchill's opposition. The original code name, Operation Anvil, was changed to Operation Dragoon. Legend has it that the new name was intended to reflect Churchill's feeling of being dragooned, that is, pushed into a situation against his will, emphasizing the tense negotiations behind the scenes. Despite these challenges and the change of name, the core objective remained unaltered: to strike from the south and trap German forces between two fronts, thereby forcing them into a double-sided fight that would stretch their defenses and hasten their collapse. The stakes for Operation Dragoon could not have been higher. Successfully seizing key ports such as Marseille and Toulon, the vital southern gateways to France, would ultimately relieve the suffocating supply shortages strangling the Allied push from Normandy. Opening this new front aimed to pincer the German military, forcing it to combat simultaneously from multiple directions and thereby undermining its strategic position. The strategic planning for this daring operation was meticulous and cautious, shaped by recent brutal encounters at Anzio and Omaha Beach, which underscored the need for precise coordination and preparation. Military planners selected the landing zone on the Var coast, situated east of Toulon, deliberately avoiding terrain heavily controlled and dominated by the Wehrmacht's commanding heights, which could have rendered the assault more perilous. The entire operation was designed as a multi-domain offensive, integrating air, sea, and land forces to maximize effectiveness. The initial phase involved an extensive aerial campaign aimed at isolating the battlefield and disrupting key German logistical and military infrastructure. This air assault targeted vital bridges, railway lines, transportation hubs, airstrips, and communication networks deep inside German-held territory, aiming to weaken their ability to reinforce and resupply their lines of defense. Simultaneously, the coastline would be subjected to relentless naval bombardments to soften defenses and prepare the way for landings. The American battleships Nevada, Texas, and Arkansas, under Vice Admiral Henry Kent Hewitt's Western Naval Task Force, alongside the British battleship Ramillies and the French battleship Lorraine, were tasked with delivering sustained and precise naval gunfire to neutralize coastal fortifications and obstacles. On the ground, the actual invasion force was commanded by the United States 7th Army, led by Major General Alexander Patch. The primary assault force consisted of Major General Lucian Truscott's 6th Corps, which was reinforced with 3 well-trained and battle-hardened infantry divisions. These divisions were to land along the coast of the Var region, executing the first wave of the attack with the objective of swiftly penetrating German defenses, establishing beachheads, and advancing inland to seize key strategic points, especially the crucial ports of Marseille and Toulon. This meticulously coordinated multi-layered assault reflected lessons learned from earlier operations and underscored the deliberate caution taken to ensure the success of this complex and vital operation. The 3rd Infantry Division, with a storied history as veterans of campaigns across North Africa, Sicily, Salerno, and Anzio, was tasked with storming Alpha Beach near Cavalaire-sur-Mer. Under the command of Major General John W. Iron Mike O'Daniel, this seasoned unit prepared for the formidable assault, bringing their extensive combat experience to bear on a new front. Conversely, the 45th Infantry Division, often called the Thunderbirds, representing the proud volunteer formations from Oklahoma and Colorado, would be assigned to land at Delta Beach, located near Lemuy and the glamorous port of Saint-Tropez. These divisions faced different challenges, but shared the overarching goal of establishing a robust beachhead along the southern coast of France. In addition, the 36th Infantry Division, comprised of National Guard units from Texas, was designated to target Camel Beach, close to St. Raphael. Their mission was critical in securing a foothold in this strategically vital region. Recognizing the need to counter any rapid German response, an ad hoc airborne force was assembled, predominantly centered around the American 517th Parachute Infantry Regiment and reinforced by the British 2nd Parachute Brigade Group. Their objective was to seize critical high ground inland, establishing a defensive advantage and disrupting enemy counterattacks before they could gain momentum. Simultaneously, elite units specializing in clandestine and precision operations, paramilitary commandos, and special forces, embarked on covert missions targeting offshore islands. Their primary task was to eliminate the German artillery positions that posed a threat to the landing beaches, ensuring the surfacing assault could proceed with reduced enemy fire. Once the initial beachhead was secured and consolidated, reinforcements from the French Army B, soon to be reorganized as the First Free French Army under the leadership of General Jean de Lattre de Tassigny, would arrive in force. These seasoned troops, having gained invaluable combat experience during the Italian campaign, would reinforce the fragile foothold and push inland. The German forces awaiting in southern France, however, were a shadow of their previous formidable strength. The formidable Army Group G, commanded by General Johannes Blaskowitz, was stretched thin and was no longer a top priority for the German war effort. Over the past months and years, the best divisions, seasoned troops, and cutting-edge equipment had been diverted to more urgent fronts, leaving behind a patchwork of weakened, understrength units and outdated armaments. As the Allies pressed forward in Normandy, the German command structure was under relentless pressure. Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge, fearing the collapse of the Atlantic Wall defenses, was pulling reinforcements from Blaskowitz sector to strengthen the defenses against the rapidly advancing Allied armies in Normandy. A striking example of this strategic drain occurred only days prior to the anticipated landings at Dragoon, when an entire tank battalion from the 11th Panzer Division was withdrawn from southern France to bolster the defenses along the French coast facing the Normandy breakout. This reallocation left Army Group G with just 11 divisions, many of which were severely understrength and ill-equipped. The composition of these units was far from ideal, with many soldiers being second- and third-rate personnel. Wounded veterans hastily pressed back into service, along with Volksdeutsch recruits originating from Poland and Czechoslovakia. Intermixed with these ranks were Ostlegionen, foreign volunteer units primarily comprising Soviet prisoners and conscripts. Their morale was notoriously fragile, often wavering under pressure. In terms of armament, the German forces faced their own decline. Their weaponry was a heterogeneous assortment of outdated, foreign-made, or captured arms, including rifles, mortars, and artillery from France, Poland, the Soviet Union, Italy, and Czechoslovakia. For divisions had become largely static, lacking the mobility needed for offensive or defensive maneuvers, and remained pinned in place along the coast. The only credible mobile force remaining was the 8th Panzer Division, commanded by General Wind von Wiedersheim. As intelligence reports indicated impending Allied landings, Blaskowitz ordered this armored division to move east of the Rhone River by August 13th, preparing for the anticipated invasion and aiming to bolster the eastern defenses. Despite these preparations, Blaskowitz was acutely aware of the unfavorable situation his forces faced. The reality was that they were significantly outmatched and outmaneuvered. Quietly, he devised plans for a disciplined withdrawal to a more defensible line near Dijon, intending to destroy critical ports and infrastructure along the way to deny their use to the advancing Allies. Yet, amidst the tense political and military atmosphere following the July 20th assassination attempt on Adolf Hitler, such a retreat was politically fraught. Orders from Berlin delaying or forbidding a strategic withdrawal prevented any immediate action, forcing German units in the region into a potentially precarious standstill. In the days leading up to the massive Dragoon landings, aimed at liberating southern France, an array of sharp, meticulously coordinated strikes struck at the German defenses along the coast. These operations aimed not only to weaken enemy positions, but also to sow confusion and disrupt their preparedness. The combination of airborne assaults, clandestine raids, and artillery strikes was designed to overwhelm the German defenses before they could fully organize a vigorous counterattack. In the initial phases of the campaign, Allied forces initiated a series of carefully planned operations designed to secure key flanks, disrupt German artillery positions, and create confusion within the enemy's ranks. These early maneuvers aimed to weaken German defenses and pave the way for the larger-scale invasions to come. On the 14th of August, a noteworthy operation known as Sitka was launched, involving the 1st Special Service Force, a highly trained joint unit composed of elite American and Canadian commandos reputed for their expertise in amphibious assaults and mountain warfare. Their primary objective was to target the Hires Islands, specifically Port Cross and Levant, which posed a significant threat to Allied landing zones and vital maritime routes. The German artillery stationed on these islands had the potential to hinder naval and land-based operations along the coast. When the 1st Special Service Force arrived at Levant, they encountered only sporadic resistance. During their reconnaissance, they uncovered what appeared to be a mere illusion, a cleverly concealed dummy coastal battery that was meant to deceive and mislead any probing forces. Meanwhile, Port Cross proved to be a more formidable obstacle. The German garrison there withdrew into an ancient fortress, holding out against the advancing forces. This stand lasted until the British battleship HMS Ramillies, supported by German artillery positioned on the mainland, subjected the fort to a systematic shelling. Eventually, on August 17th, the Germans capitulated, surrendering their positions under mounting pressure. Simultaneously, to the west of the main landing area, French commandos undertook Operation Romeo at Cap Niger. This daring assault targeted critical German artillery emplacements that played a vital role in defending the coast. Despite encountering losses, several commandos falling into a concealed minefield, the operation successfully eliminated key enemy positions, thereby easing the way for subsequent landings. To add layers of deception and further confuse the German defenders, Allied planners orchestrated Operation Span, a sophisticated misdirection effort. It involved simulated landings and the deployment of phantom paratroopers, all designed to divert German attention away from the actual invasion sites along the coastline. The airborne component of the operation commenced during the early hours of August 15th. It was executed as a swift, intense strike behind enemy lines by the 1st Airborne Task Force, a diverse assembly of American and British paratroopers and glider troops. Their mission was to land deeply inland, specifically in the River Argens Valley near Le Mouilly, to seize and hold strategic high ground, and to prevent German reinforcements from reaching the main invasion beaches. The operation was hampered initially by fog and low clouds, which caused many parachutists to land far from their designated objectives, some as far as 10 to 15 miles away from the intended landing zones. Despite these challenges, British units managed to rally quickly. They captured villages including Le Maitin, La Motte, and the important Naderby River Bridge, establishing control over the high ground northeast and east of Le Mouilly. American paratroopers succeeded in securing positions to the west and south of the town, consolidating their hold. The 550th Glider Infantry Battalion faced difficulties in seizing the town of Le Mouilly itself, but with reinforcements arriving the following day, they finally managed to take control and captured approximately 700 German prisoners, significantly reducing enemy presence in the region. The entire 1st Airborne Task Force established a strong defensive perimeter, resisting counterattacks with relatively minimal casualties, totaling 104 fallen, including those lost during glider crashes and parachuting accidents. Meanwhile, the local French resistance fighters surfaced from hiding, engaging in sabotage operations that targeted German transportation routes, such as roads and bridges, effectively choking off movement and resupply to German units. With inland objectives secured, the stage was now perfectly set for the amphibious assault. On the very same morning, under the cover of darkness, the Western Naval Task Force stealthily moved into position, ready to launch the main beach landing. Just before 6 o'clock in the morning, a powerful aerial bombardment erupted as more than 1,300 Allied aircraft, comprising bombers based in Italy, Sardinia, and Corsica, struck German communications, railroads, and bridges with relentless fury. These attacks were further intensified by the sabotage activities of the French resistance, which considerably hampered German reinforcements and resupply efforts. By 8 o'clock, the aerial barrage subsided, and the invasion fleet of landing craft surged forward under a steady, withering fire. The beaches along the Var coast, while fortified and mined, did not feature the extensive underwater obstacles found at Normandy. This was largely due to the region's steep coastline gradients and a modest tidal range, which made it more difficult for the Germans to establish elaborate underwater defenses. These geographical features allowed the invading forces to approach more directly, reducing the complexity of the amphibious operation and providing a better opportunity for success. As the advancing landing craft launched their rockets, they unleashed a barrage capable of exploding landmines hidden beneath the sands, effectively clearing a safer and less perilous route for the troops who were pouring ashore. The United States 6th Army Corps, leading the charge in this colossal amphibious assault, deployed 3 seasoned and battle-hardened divisions, each experienced and prepared for such a formidable operation. Surprisingly, their initial onslaught encountered comparatively light resistance, which came as a notable relief amid the chaos of invasion. On Alpha Beach at Cavalier-sur-Mer, the famed 3rd Infantry Division swiftly overwhelmed scattered defenders, Ostruppen, or Eastern European troops allied with the Germans, who, faced with the relentless pressure, surrendered in large numbers almost immediately. Meanwhile, on Delta Beach, near the towns of Le Mouilly and Saint-Tropez, the 45th Infantry Division secured their landing zones rapidly. They seamlessly linked up with airborne units that had already taken control of the commanding high ground, establishing vital footholds and ensuring the successful consolidation of the beachhead. Yet, amid these relatively straightforward advances, the most intense combat unfolded on the right flank of the landing zones, at a place called Camel Beach, close to St. Raphael. Here, the 16th Airborne Division met stiff and disciplined resistance from well-entrenched German coastal artillery and anti-aircraft batteries. One specific sector, assigned the codename Camel Red, proved remarkably resilient. Regardless of a massive bombing raid involving nearly 90 B-24 Liberator bombers and heavy naval bombardments, the defenders held their ground stubbornly. The landing craft found it impossible to approach under the relentless hail of fire, forcing commanders to shift their focus toward nearby sectors, Camel Blue and Camel Green, where troops managed to land without significant opposition. However, even these seemingly less defended zones were not without tragedy. A United States tank landing ship, designated USS LS Tinus 282, was struck by a guided missile, and Henschel HS-293 glide bomb, fired by the elusive German bomber wing known as Kampfgeschwader 100. This precision attack resulted in the tragic loss of 40 lives, a somber reminder of the deadly precision of German weaponry even late in the campaign. Despite this tragedy, the overall casualties from the invasion remained remarkably low, especially considering the scale of the operation. The total number of fallen soldiers across the landing was just 95, with an additional 385 wounded, underscoring the effectiveness of Allied firepower, meticulous planning, and seamless coordination that minimized loss of life. Once the beachheads were firmly established, Major General Lucien Truscott pushed the Sixth Corps inland, pressing their advantage further into enemy territory. Simultaneously, French forces began to arrive onshore, preparing to pivot their efforts westward, toward key strategic locations such as Toulon and Marseille. The German defense, already stretched thin, rapidly descended into chaos as soon as the first Allied soldiers set foot on the beaches. Resistance sabotage conducted by the French resistance had successfully severed critical communication lines, plunging German command networks into disarray. Combined with the relentless Allied aerial bombing campaigns that shattered radio relays and targeted command posts, the German field commanders found themselves increasingly isolated, with little reliable information to guide their actions. At the forefront stood General Ferdinand Nulling, commander of the LXII Corps based in Dragoon. Cut off and encircled by incoming Allied paratroopers, Nulling's communications were entirely severed, leaving him in a desperate and precarious position. In a frantic effort to stem the tide, he ordered the 148th Infantry Division to launch a counterattack against the beachhead near Le Mouilly in an attempt to push back the advancing forces. However, this effort quickly unraveled amidst disorganized resistance and poor coordination, leaving the Germans unable to mount any meaningful response. As the day progressed into evening on August the 15th, the Germans failed to execute any coordinated or large-scale assault on the Allied landing zones. The following morning, General Richard von Schwerin managed to assemble approximately 4 infantry battalions to launch a two-pronged offensive targeting both Le Mouilly and Dragoon. By then, however, the situation had dramatically shifted in favor of the Allies. Reinforcements, including additional troops, armored units, and vehicles, poured into the area, while the mobile American 45th Division engaged in fierce combat with the retreating German units. After nearly a full day of intense and brutal fighting, von Schwerin recognized the futility of further resistance and ordered a nighttime withdrawal. By the 18th of August, the German counterattacks had completely collapsed. St. Raphael was fully secured under Allied control. A broad beachhead had been established along the coast, and airborne units had successfully linked up with the advancing ground forces at Le Mouilly. That night, the grim reality finally sank in among the German high command, as they understood that their defenses had been breached and their strategic positions compromised beyond repair. Army Group G recognized that attempting to push the Allies back into the sea was no longer a feasible option. Their situation grew increasingly dire as the Falaise Pocket, an encircling trap designed to trap retreating German forces, loomed to the north, threatening to enclose and annihilate large formations fleeing from the advancing Allies. In an unusual deviation from Hitler's strict no-retreat policy, the Führer, with evident reluctance, authorized a retreat plan involving the withdrawal of both Army Group G and Army Group B from southern France. This decision marked a significant departure from prior doctrines that insisted on holding positions at all costs. The Führer's order stipulated that all mobile German units in the region would retreat northward, consolidating with Army Group B to establish a new defensive line stretching from the town of Sens through Dijon and onward to the Swiss border, thereby forming a defensive barrier in the face of the relentless Allied advance. This German withdrawal was swiftly detected by the Allies through ultra-intelligence, their top-secret program dedicated to intercepting and decoding German military communications. The Allied cryptanalysts confirmed that the Germans were indeed preparing to pull back, and this revelation ensured that the Allies could accelerate their efforts to cut off the retreat before the Germans could escape. As the news spread, a frantic race ensued, aimed at intercepting the German forces before they could consolidate their defenses further north or escape into the safety of Switzerland. The German retreat, initially cautious, began unraveling rapidly once the Allied forces launched their fierce counteroffensive. The pursuit quickly turned from a measured advance into a swift, vigorous chase, transforming what was once a fragile foothold into a full-scale campaign to trap and destroy the German units in flight. Particularly swift were the motorized units of the Allied forces, especially the United States 45th and 3rd Infantry Divisions. These units broke free from their initial beachhead positions with astonishing speed, pushing northwestward along the coast, eager to reach strategic ports like Toulon and Marseille. Their rapid advance threatened to cut off the German retreat at its source. In response, General Johannes Blaskowitz made a difficult but necessary decision. He decided to sacrifice certain segments of his forces, namely, the 242nd Infantry Division defending Toulon and the 244th Infantry Division holding Marseille, aiming to buy critical time for the majority of his troops to escape through the valley of the Rhône River. Meanwhile, the Free French Army, under the command of General Jean de Lattre de Tassigny, pressed aggressively toward the key port cities, seizing opportunities to strike at them with speed and elan. De Latter's rapid progress allowed him to reconsider the original plan of sequential assaults on Toulon and Marseille. Instead of attacking these ports one after the other, he opted for a more daring strategy, aiming to strike both simultaneously. To accomplish this, he divided his forces. General Joseph de Goisselard de Montsobert moved eastward to force a rout into Toulon from that side, while General Edgar de Larminat advanced from the north, aiming to encircle and isolate the port. After intense and bitter street fighting around the town of Hyères, the French forces succeeded in reaching Toulon. Montsobert's troops, in a calculated maneuver, encircled the city by severing the crucial highway connecting Toulon with Marseille, effectively trapping the German defenders inside. Urban combat erupted fiercely in the streets, and as resistance hardened, disagreements arose between Larminat and de Lattre regarding the best approach. Ultimately, de Lattre assumed direct command to coordinate the assault. It took nearly a full week of relentless fighting, but eventually Toulon capitulated, surrendering 18,000 German soldiers. The French forces suffered approximately 2,700 casualties during the siege. In the case of Marseille, Montsobert's units managed to overcome the German detachment at Aubagny before advancing into the city itself. Unlike Toulon, Marseille's German commander refused to evacuate civilians, which led to increasing hostility among the local population. With the assistance of French resistance guerrillas, the civilians' protests further drained German resources and morale. The German defenses in Marseille shattered into isolated pockets scattered throughout the city. By the 27th of August, most of Marseille was liberated, and formal surrender was signed early the following morning. The German forces surrendered with a total of 11,000 prisoners taken, while French casualties amounted to roughly 1,825. Despite the Germans' efforts to destroy critical infrastructure, French engineers responded swiftly, working diligently to restore the port's operational capacity. Their efforts proved successful, allowing the steady arrival of Allied reinforcements, supplies, and equipment from the south, vital for sustaining the momentum of the broader campaign. These victories, especially in the ports of Toulon and Marseille, owed much to the outstanding efforts and bravery of the Free French colonial infantry, whose dedication played a crucial role in turning the tide during this phase of the campaign. Soldiers hailing from Algeria, Mali, Mauritania, and the Senegalese tirailleurs fought with remarkable courage and unwavering resolve alongside their European allies, contributing significantly to the liberation effort by systematically reclaiming French territory one sector at a time. While the coastal regions had been secured earlier, the more daunting challenge lay deeper inland, where the retreat of Army Group G was accelerating at a staggering pace. The German forces were steadily retreating northward with relentless intensity, even as cities like Marseille and Toulon fell into Allied hands, marking the gradual collapse of their defensive front. In an effort to slow down this rapid withdrawal, the German 11th Panzer Division carried out several misleading maneuvers, false attacks and feints aimed at the vicinity of Aix-en-Provence, with the strategic goal of creating a temporary delay for the pursuing Allied forces. These diversions were intended to buy precious time and facilitate the withdrawal of the German LXXXV Corps, along with the 4 Luftwaffe Field Corps, both of which were retreating from the Rhone Valley region under mounting pressure. However, a turning point came when Allied intelligence uncovered critical information that tipped the balance of the battle. Through the clever decryption of German radio communications, Allied strategists discovered a significant weakness, an exposed flank to the east of the Rhone at the city of Grenoble. This vulnerability had emerged when the 157th Infantry Division had begun its domino-like retreat toward the Alps, leaving a broad, open flank. Recognizing this opportunity, the Allied command swiftly dispatched a highly mobile armored unit known as Task Force Butler, commanded by Brigadier General Frederick Butler. Their mission was clear: to strike rapidly into this vulnerable gap, aiming to outpace and encircle the retreating Germans, thereby preventing their regrouping and escape. Under revised orders from Lieutenant General Truscott, who regarded the entire German force as too strong for a frontal assault, Task Force Butler advanced decisively and captured strategic hills just to the north of Montélimar, a small but pivotal town that lay directly on the Germans' retreat route. From this elevated position, the task force aggressively shelled the German columns as they retreated, aided by French resistance fighters who executed sabotage operations, damaging roads and harassing rearguard units, further hampering the enemy's progress. The German command was shaken by this unexpected threat. In response, the 11th Panzer Division, under the command of Wendt von Wiedersheim, quickly counterattacked in an attempt to relieve the pressure. They were reinforced by improvised Luftwaffe battle groups, which joined the fight in an effort to push back the Allied breakthrough. Initially, this German counterattack succeeded in cutting off Task Force Butler from its supply lines, creating a temporary setback. Nonetheless, this success was short-lived. Over the subsequent days, additional reinforcements gradually arrived, drawn from the U.S. 36th Division, intended to bolster efforts and establish a more formidable barrier. Unfortunately, persistent shortages of manpower and supplies limited the effectiveness of these reinforcements, preventing a decisive breakthrough or full blockade of the fleeing German forces. As a result, Task Force Butler was eventually disbanded, with Major General John A. Dahlquist assuming direct command of the situation. Despite the arrival of more advanced tanks from the 11th Panzer Division, the American assaults on Montélimar faltered, German counterattacks gained ground, and some of their operational plans fell into Allied hands through captured documents. Still, the defenders managed to hold their hill positions, preventing a complete dislodgement. The front line devolved into a grueling stalemate, characterized by relentless attacks, spoiling operations, and countermeasures from both sides. The American forces found themselves under increasing pressure from multiple directions, both from the front and rear, and were effectively cornered at times. On August 26th, a visibly frustrated Lieutenant General Truscott personally traveled to Dahlquist's headquarters, contemplating the removal of the battalion commander due to mounting concerns about the stalled offensive. However, upon witnessing the exhausted state of the troops, the depleted terrain, and the mounting casualties, Truscott decided to withhold the order, recognizing the need for patience and continued effort. By August 28th, Most of the German forces had managed to slip past the American positions, leaving behind a trail of destruction. Some 4,000 vehicles burned and approximately 1,500 horses killed, evidence of the fierce fighting and chaos of the retreat. On August 29th, Montélimar finally fell into Allied hands. The remnants of the German defenders surrendered, marking the end of this intense engagement. The battle had exacted a heavy toll on both sides. Germany suffered roughly 2,100 casualties in battle and captured around 8,000 prisoners, while American forces incurred approximately 1,575 casualties. This fierce clash, fought with intense determination and strategic ingenuity, had come very close to turning into a decisive encirclement, but ultimately fell short. The attempted trap narrowly avoided collapsing the German retreat, transforming the subsequent pursuit into a desperate, frantic chase across the northern landscape. The United States Sixth Corps, pushing forward with determination and supported on its flank by the French Two Corps, launched a vigorous offensive aimed at cutting off the retreating German forces before they could regroup and establish new defensive lines near the city of Dijon. The German troops fought fiercely to protect their withdrawal routes, heavily relying on the mobile and formidable 11th Panzer Division to serve as a shield for their retreating units. By the 1st of September, the 45th Infantry Division managed to outflank German defenses, bypassing their strongest positions to seize the strategic town of Meximur, a move that struck directly at the core of the German retreat corridor. Yet, their advance provoked a fierce counterattack from the 11th Panzer Division, which resulted in significant German resistance, inflicting roughly 215 American casualties and destroying several tanks and other vehicles. This fierce engagement underscored just how stubborn and resilient the German resistance remained, even in the face of advancing Allied forces. Meanwhile, the main German retreating columns kept moving through the city of Lyon. When the 36th Infantry Division arrived there on September 2nd, they found Lyon already in flames, the result of intense battles between the French resistance fighters and collaborationist forces allied with the Germans. The following day, Lyon was finally liberated from German control, and around 2,000 German soldiers surrendered. However, most of the remaining retreating forces had already slipped past the city's defenses, continuing their withdrawal efforts elsewhere. In an attempt to trap the Germans entirely, the Allies carried out a final maneuver involving a pincer movement toward Bourg-en-Bresse. This operation included the participation of the 45th Division and the 117th Cavalry Squadron, a unit that was a remnant of the earlier Task Force Butler. While the 45th Division was unable to break through German defenses near Bourg-en-Bresse, the Cavalry Squadron achieved early success by seizing control of the towns of Montrevel and Marbaz to the north. Unfortunately, this victory was short-lived. The 117th Cavalry Squadron found itself nearly annihilated after being surrounded by the robust 11th Panzer Division, which succeeded in reopening the escape route for the German forces. Sporadic skirmishes erupted along the front lines, but neither side was able to secure a decisive victory. The Germans struggled to establish a stable and solid defensive line, while the Allies failed to deliver a final, crushing blow to their adversaries. As the German forces withdrew further, they continued to avoid entrapment, and neither side gained a decisive upper hand for some time. The Germans managed to prevent the formation of a stable defensive position, and the Allies were unable to deliver the all-out assault necessary to end the campaign decisively. However, on the 10th of September, forward elements of the Sixth Corps linked up with General George Patton's Third Army near Dijon. This crucial convergence effectively closed the German retreat in the south, creating an unbroken Allied front extending from the Swiss border all the way to the English Channel. This link-up marked a significant turning point in the campaign by sealing off the southern route of the German withdrawal. Following this, General Truscott aimed to push through the Belfort Gap and bring an end to the campaign. Yet, on the 14th of September, the Allied High Command decided to halt further advance. The German Army Group G, having avoided complete destruction, managed to dig in along the protective slopes of the Vosges Mountains, establishing a strong and defensible line. With this strategic fallback, the swift momentum of Operation Dragoon gradually came to a halt. As historian Anthony Beaver pointed out in his analysis of the Dragoon landings, quote, prompted a rapid German withdrawal and thus reduced the damage and suffering inflicted upon France. One of the most significant achievements of Operation Dragoon was the reopening of France's vital southern ports. Despite relentless German efforts to demolish and disable them, Allied engineers rapidly restored the port facilities at Marseille and Toulon. By the month of October of the same year, over 524,000 tons of supplies had been passing through these ports each month, an amount which exceeded one-third of all Allied cargo transported along the Western Front, substantially alleviating the logistical strain that had been heavily felt following the breakthrough in Normandy. From a political standpoint, the success of Dragoon played a pivotal role in catalyzing the collapse of the Vichy regime. As German forces dismantled the puppet government and moved Marshal Philippe Pétain into German captivity, the provisional government of the French Republic swiftly reasserted its authority over the liberated territories. This resurgence of French sovereignty further accelerated the collapse and disintegration of the French collaborationist government, marking a decisive turning point in the liberation of France from German occupation. Despite its significance, the operation often finds itself in the shadow of more celebrated military campaigns such as Overlord or Market Garden. Indeed, the broader narrative of World War II tends to highlight these grand-scale battles, overshadowing other vital but less famed operations. Nevertheless, the importance of this particular operation cannot be understated or dismissed easily. Prominent figures like Winston Churchill and many British military leaders openly criticized the decision to undertake Dragoon, chiefly because they believed it diverted precious resources away from the critical fighting fronts in Italy and the Western Front. They argued that this redirection of forces and supplies might have unintended consequences, especially in giving Soviet leader Joseph Stalin greater leeway and freedom to expand his influence unchecked in Eastern Europe. Such concerns stemmed from a strategic perspective that prioritized the stability and security of the Western Allies' primary invasion routes and fronts. Contrasting these criticisms, American military authority figures viewed the operation in a fundamentally different light. To them, Dragoon was a crucial component of the overall Allied strategy, one that was essential for multiple reasons. They recognized that advancing along the French coast would allow Allied forces to break through the formidable German defenses known as the West Wall or Siegfried Line. This breakthrough was expected to not only weaken German resistance, but also to facilitate subsequent advances deeper into Western Europe. Moreover, executing this operation would help to alleviate pressure on American and Allied units engaged in countering the German offensive in the Ardennes, famously known as the Battle of the Bulge, which was underway during the same period. Additionally, American strategists saw Dragoon as laying the groundwork necessary for the impending crossing of the Rhine River, an essential step toward the final defeat of Nazi Germany. They envisioned the operation as a vital maneuver that would expedite the collapse of German resistance, and Eisenhower himself articulated this sentiment. He noted that there had been no development during that phase of the war which contributed more definitively to the Allies' advantages than this secondary but strategically significant attack conducted through the Rhone Valley, which was set in motion during those critical months. Throughout the fighting retreat, German forces were compelled to withdraw on multiple fronts. In their retreat, they evacuated approximately 88,000 troops northward, a harrowing and costly movement. Despite their efforts to retreat in an organized manner, nearly 19,000 of these soldiers were captured by Allied forces during the process. The Germans' retreat was not confined solely to the Vosges Mountains, but extended further, heading directly toward the heartland of Germany itself. The success of operations like Dragoon played a crucial role in this progression. By opening a new front in southeastern France, they effectively created a conduit for Allied advance into the German rear areas. This strategic opening facilitated the subsequent collapse of German defenses, effectively setting the stage for the final push into the German interior. In this way, the operation not only contributed to the immediate military victories, but also fundamentally altered the trajectory of the final phases of the conflict, ensuring that the Germans' retreat would eventually culminate in their total defeat.